we're ready to start, and we're so glad you're with us this evening for the second Zoom presentation in this round of the 3.5% project. It's nice to have you all here. As you know, this round of the 3.5% project is devoted to cultivating an active heart in response to the call that each of us hears to action. And writer and storyteller Michael Meade says, I love this quote. He says, when the world is in upheaval, many callings are awakened. A lot of you know about Flagstaff College and the 3.5% project because you live in Flagstaff, but some people are joining us from afar, and I want to give a special welcome to those folks. And I also want to note that you can keep in touch with what's going on with Flagstaff College through our social media channels, outlets. We are on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and we ask you to like us on those things. And I also want to note that some people say they've been having problems getting our newsletters and our communiques. And it sounds like sometimes those are going into your spam boxes or into your promotion or social boxes. So please check those in advance. And if you're having other problems, let me know, okay? And finally, I want folks to be sure that they know that Flagstaff College is accepting applications for fall semester to our BA program and our certificate program in sustainability and social change. We welcome full-time and part-time students. We have a very affordable tuition, and we have robust scholarship support as well. So contact us if you want more information, and please spread the word. Tonight, we are honored to have two people whose active hearts have led them to decades of work for the sake of climate justice and Native rights, and on behalf of this land on which many of us live. Especially as we face the current and future realities of human-caused climate crisis and climate injustice, we need to learn about our responsibility in relation to the land, its history, and the Native peoples who have always loved and considered the land family. This evening affords us an opportunity to do just that. One last thing before we get started, I want to remind you that if you have a question to ask one of our speakers, go ahead and put it in the chat, but please put a Q in front of it so we know to be alert to your question. And now I will turn things over to Marcus Ford, who is the co-founder of Flagstaff College, and he will introduce speakers and begin our program. But once again, welcome everyone.
Oh, welcome, and thank you, Sandra. The need to decarbonize our economy is crystal clear. For some, this means that nuclear energy must be on the table. If so, we can all agree that it must be produced in a manner that is safe and that the costs, the real costs, are shared equally. Too often, the benefits of a technology deemed necessary flow mainly to the rich, and the costs, the real costs, are disproportionately borne by the already disadvantaged. Our first presenter, Talia Boyd, will speak about uranium mining and milling on the Navajo Nation and the very real dangers associated with these activities. Talia is a native of this part of the world, born and raised on the Navajo Nation. She's a longtime activist and organizer who now works for the Grand Canyon Trust. Uranium mining and milling is an especially timely issue, given the war in Ukraine and the curtailment of importing uranium from Russia. The price of uranium is now more than doubled, up 116% this year. And there is now a renewed pressure to restart the mines that just last year were not sufficiently profitable to operate. Talia, thank you so much for helping us understand these important cultural and environmental issues.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Would you like me to begin?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you. I wasn't too sure. Everybody, good evening. My name is Talia Boyd. As Marcus mentioned, I am Diné. I'm Twitch eating Tohe Gleaning Bushin. Ashe Edeshe do Tabahan Dashanella Akut Adina Assange. Not in Georgia, Asia Hawan. Greetings, everybody, and to my relatives, my Diné relatives who have logged on. I just thank you for having me here. I'm based in Gallup, New Mexico. I was born and raised on the res. Actually grew up in a small town 27 miles east of Tuba City. And every day on my way to school, I pass the Tuba City disposal site, which is also called Rare Metals. And it's a former uranium mill. And when I was a kid, it wasn't fenced and it wasn't covered. And there were no signs indicating that it was radioactive. And we didn't know what the heck it was, but there was a trailer park community located right next to it. And I had a lot of friends who lived in that community who we would pick up every day on our way to school. And they were decimated with cancer and other health disparities, and they were forced to relocate several years later. And by then it was too late because people were already dying. And then my family relocated to New Mexico, Church Rock, New Mexico, which is the site of the largest radioactive spill in US history. Back in 1979, there was a breach in an earthen dam that released over 94 million gallons of radioactive sludge into the arroyos that went into the Rio Puerco, right in the middle of Gallup, New Mexico, where I live now, past the Arizona, New Mexico state line, all the way to the Little Colorado River. So every community between here and the Little Colorado has been impacted on some level. This incident happened 3 months after the 3 Mile Island incident in Pennsylvania. However, we didn't get national media coverage, and we're still pleading for cumulative studies in our area, air, land, soil, and health studies. So those are some of the realities that we have been dealing with here on Navajo. We have over 525 abandoned uranium mines. Those are clusters of mines, so they're not individual mines. So we have more like 1,000 abandoned uranium mines. Those are complements of the Cold War and the US government when they came in and started doing exploratory drilling, really just came in without consent from any of the communities. And they just, raped the land. They took what they wanted as far as uranium. And we were left with the waste that comes from that. And if folks know about nuclear, you know that it takes time for those effects to hit the health, the human health. And so, decades later, again, people are dying of different health disparities, mostly cancers. Here in Gallup, New Mexico, we had a local physician who's lived here for 40 years. He works at the Gallup Indian Medical Center. And a lot of his former patients were former uranium miners. And he indicated that there was a very prevalent kidney cancer in the area that wasn't a very rare kidney cancer in the area, but it wasn't prevalent anywhere else. He made a report to the CDC. I think it did get published on the CDC website, but he made just like a little short 1-page infographic around it. But we're still trying to educate folks. There's been a few initiatives to try to understand the health disparities and the correlation between exposure of those things, such as the Navajo birth cohort. So I do have a presentation I wanted to share with folks, but I wanted to share my own personal story quickly before I jumped in, just to give you an idea of why and how and where this fight is for me personally as a Diné woman. I come from a frontline community. I've lost relatives to different cancers. I work closely still with a lot of frontline community members, so I hear a lot of the horror stories that come out of being living in an impacted community. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and I hope I can do it properly. I was having trouble earlier, so let's see. All right, so here's my little presentation. Let me get it going. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, okay, excellent. All right, let me get this little screen situated. Sorry, guys, I have a lot of screens here. All right, so here is a map of the Bears Ears, actually the Colorado Plateau. But before I jump into that, again, I am the Cultural Landscapes Manager for the Grand Canyon Trust, and our mission is to safeguard the wonders of the Colorado Plateau while supporting the rights of its Native peoples. And so we do that by working closely with tribes and tribal members and leaders. Ooh, did I just put my Zoom screen there? Sorry, guys, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, there we go. So here's a map of the Colorado Plateau, and this is where most of our work consists of within the Grand Canyon Trust. Bears Ears is really at the heart of the Colorado Plateau. And it's a unique monument because it acknowledges and honors tribal knowledge, and its proclamation mandates collaborative management between tribal governments and the federal government. It was designated in 2016 at 1.36 million acres by the Obama administration. It was slashed by 85% by the Trump administration down to 200,000 acres. The monument was restored back in by the Biden administration in 2021 back to the 1.36 million acres. The tribes had originally advocated for the monument to be designated to 1.9 million acres. It is a significant cultural landscape because the tribes have utilized this particular piece of our homelands since the beginning of time, and it's a shared landscape between many tribes. But it's very significant in the fact that it provides medicine. We go there to gather our traditional medicines. We go there to hunt. We go there to have ceremonies. We go there to gather firewood for our homes during the winter. So we utilize the landscape for many reasons. The monument designation also protects the land from future mining. And so as the Bears Ears land management process plays out, we will see more on how to protect it from things like pinyon and juniper degradation and livestock grazing. Back in 2015, the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition was created by the 5 sovereign nations of Navajo, Hopi, Zuni, Ute Mountain Ute, and the Ute Indian tribe, who sought to protect Bears Ears by advocating for the monument designation. And this was done in a sovereign to sovereign, government to government action. And again, it was decided to be designated in 2016. Yep, trying to jump to my next slide here. Excuse me. Oops, now I'm getting. Okay, here we go. Here is a map of Bears Ears, and I don't know if you folks can see this, but if you see the outline here of the designation, it goes up this way, goes down over here. And if you look at it, it looks like a bear. Here's the nose, here's the ears, and here's a feather. And this was one of our Hopi traditional elders pointed that out, in the fact that symbolizes that the prayers were answered by the ancestors, right? That all of our prayers collectively came together to protect the land. And so that's a really neat thing I wanted to point out for folks. But there was a sticker made with that image on it that has been disseminated, I think, by the Utah Diné organization and the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition. So the trust supported tribes and the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition in a lot of ways, mostly behind the scenes. We provided a lot of things like technical support, creating maps, media communications, and even field tours, taking tribal leaders out into the landscape. So shortly after the monument was reduced, the trust and the tribes and some other NGOs litigated against the cuts to the monument because we knew that they were inconsistent with the Antiquities Act of 1906. The litigation was ongoing until October of 2021, when the Biden administration restored the monument and issued new proclamations for the monument. However, litigation is not technically over. We're still in discussions with the government over some of the details, but the new proclamation can basically be considered the lay of the land. Let me see. Okay, here we go. Here's the White Mesa Mill. Recently, the Grand Canyon Trust released a story map titled The Business of Radioactive Waste. This report details how the White Mesa Mill has become America's cheapest radioactive waste dump. And so here's Bears Ears. It's about a mile from Bears Ears. And on this side is the White Mesa community. And these are their tailings waste ponds. So White Mesa Mill is located right here. And again, it's about a mile east of the boundaries of the restored monument and about 2.5 miles from the closest residents of the White Mesa Ute Mountain Ute community. And to give you an idea of how close it is, again, here is a picture of the mill. And then there's the Bears Ears National Monument in the back. And next picture, here's a picture of the mill, and the White Mesa community is right here. So it's very, very close. The White Mesa Mill is currently owned by the Energy Fuels Resources. It's a Canadian multinational corporation. The mill was licensed in 1980 to process uranium ore mined in the Four Corners region. Back then, the company planned to run the mill for 15 years and then close and reclaim it. Although 40 years later, the mill is still operating and not one of the mill's waste pits has been fully reclaimed. So how have they managed to stay in business? Well, that's where this report comes in. We highlight a lot of those, what they call alternate feeds that they are shipping to the White Mesa Mill. So here is a uranium price chart. As you can see, uranium is a very volatile commodity. So the mill has gone through a pattern of running ore through when the price of uranium is high, and then putting the mill on standby and laying off workers when the price of uranium is low. And here is a quote from one of the representatives from the company who told the Salt Lake Tribune that the White Mesa Mill barely makes money. It's always at risk of permanent closure. So this is something that they're constantly dealing with, which is why they decided to go into the business of alternate feed and becoming a waste disposal facility as opposed to a uranium mill. So instead, like I said, the mill has transformed its business model to operate as a waste disposal service, earning millions in fees to process and discard other industrial and military facilities, radioactive waste. Over 700 million pounds of these wastes have been buried in the mill's waste pits. So basically, it's cheaper for the company and polluters to send their waste to this facility. And it's been identified that it's about half the cost for these companies to send it to the White Mesa Mill as opposed to a licensed low-level radioactive repository or facility. And for some reason, my animations are really slow. So the mill's owner runs the waste through the mill in small amounts. What they do is they try to extract small amounts of uranium, and it's called alternate feed milling. According to federal and state regulators, that changes the waste legal classification so that the leftovers can legally be stored there on site. Often more than 99% of what arrives at the mill, again, can be buried. So they only extract less than 1% of uranium out of all of this waste that they send there. And then the rest of the waste is just stored on site in perpetuity. And it definitely has an impact on Utah's clean air, land and water, and the environment. And the people, of course, are being contaminated, and this is perpetuating environmental injustices. So this map right here shows the various sources of so-called alternate feed. These are the areas where it's coming from. It's mostly in the US and Canada. These feeds include uranium-bearing waste from other contaminated areas around the country, including remnants from the Manhattan Project and areas called fuse wrap sites, which were Army sites that were involved in the construction of nuclear weapons, and Superfund sites. Most recently, they've also been importing waste from the Baltic nation of Estonia here, and then also from Japan. So they've gone international now and shipping their waste to the White Mesa Mill. Here is the domestic map showing those sources. Energy Fuels Radioactive Disposal Services have placed a burden, again, on the White Mesa Ute Mountain Ute community, and it endangers the Bears Ears cultural landscape. And as you look at this map, you can see that a lot of these areas, Nevada Test Site, the Sequoia Fuels, the Midnight Mine, these are all coming from other tribal lands. The Nevada Test Site and the Yucca Mountain, where a lot of the Nevada test bombings occurred, is Western Shoshone land, and Yucca Mountain is sacred to Western Shoshone. The Midnight Mine is on the Spokane Res, and our Spokane relatives are being impacted by that. You know, in the Grand Canyon and the 11 associated tribes located there, and the uranium mining that is occurring there, you know, they're being impacted by that. You know, we have the Black Hills and our Lakota relatives who are also being impacted. And here in New Mexico, we have the Grants Mining District and Mount Taylor, which is a sacred mountain to over 20 tribes in both Arizona and New Mexico that has also been desecrated by uranium mining, and they're proposing new mining at the base of our sacred mountain still. So, oh, excuse me, I need some water. The mill's radioactive waste disposal, again, is an environmental injustice. It's environmental racism as far as I'm concerned, because it does impact the Ute Mountain Ute community specifically. During the numerous basket maker and ancestral Pueblo cultural sites on the White Mesa Mill have been impacted as well, including pit houses, kivas, burial sites. They've all been disturbed and desecrated by the mill and by the waste ponds that were built. And the mill plans to dig even more waste ponds, which could desecrate additional cultural sites and put them at risk. There have been, again, several alternative feed streams that have come from tribal communities. Again, that is a case of environmental racism, and this is very prevalent within the nuclear fuel chain, because basically they're shifting radioactive waste from one tribal community to another. Some more examples of radioactive waste that has been taken there were contaminated waste from the Cherokee land, again, from Spokane relatives in Washington State, the Muskogee Creek Nation, the Masuga First Nation of Canada, and the mill owner is actually hoping to import even more radioactive material from Navajo Nation. So the Ute Mountain Ute tribe strongly opposes the alternative feed shipments and the operation of the mill. So much so that in August of 2021, they passed a formal tribal resolution stating that they wanted the operations of the mill to cease entirely. There's the resolution there. Again, we've been working very closely with the tribe and the tribal council folks. In December of 2021, the EPA barred the mill from accepting Superfund site waste, citing the egregious violation. So here's a picture of the High Country News front page. And this was a flyover that EPA did of the facility. So when you, right here, this part right here is supposed to be fully submerged in liquid. And this material on the bottom here is highly radioactive material, and it's emitting radon and other contaminants into the air. And so this is why the EPA barred the facility back in 2021 of December. EPA estimated that it was improperly exposed waste, and it was emitting 10 times more radon than nearby covered waste. On March 15th, 2021, the Grand Canyon Trust released a story map collection and our research report detailing radioactive waste approved or considered for shipment to the Southeast White Mesa Mill since the early 1990s. I really encourage folks, if you haven't had a chance to check it out, go to our website, Grand Canyon Trust, and check out the story map and the report that we put out. It's very, very informative, and we hope folks can use it as an educational tool. So a solution that we have identified is that we need to amend the federal law so that uranium mills can't compete in the waste disposal market, and that they have to comply with laws that govern commercial radioactive waste disposal. You know, right now it's not a level playing field because they're competing with an unfair advantage because they can take this waste in at half the cost. And they don't have to comply with the same kind of regulations that a properly licensed facility would. So it would take an amendment to the federal law. We also, again, I was talking about this earlier with folks, we recently organized some flyovers over the White Mesa Mill with some media and some tribal members last week. And you know what? They're still out of compliance. We flew over the mill and the tailings ponds, and they're even worse. I mean, they're even more exposed. They're not submerged in liquid. So it hasn't been addressed at all. What else are we doing? Well, we are working very closely with the White Mesa Concerned Community Group, which is a local grassroots community group. We work with them and organize different events, and we pull in elected tribal leaders and decision makers to help have those conversations with tribal members. There's some really grave concerns that the community has around water contamination. Of course, the human rights violations of clean air and clean land and water. There's also concerns of transportation routes to the facility because there has been accidents in the past. There's also, of course, the health disparities. There aren't any studies, so they don't know, the data behind it really. And the land degradation, like I mentioned earlier, and the desecration of cultural sites. When the mill was built, it was basically built on a Ute burial site. And so there were a lot of sites that were desecrated in that manner. Some of the things that we've collaborated with the White Mesa Ute Community Group are their annual spiritual protest walk and conference. We also organize a national town hall. We do some skills building workshops. We do flyovers, and we also do field tours with the community. We also, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to keep us within our time frame here, and I want to leave enough time for people to ask you questions and enough time for Roberto to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Sandra, are there questions in
Now
the
that our
chat room?
5 tribes coalition have now achieved another.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, that's my presentation, y'all. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry to cut you off. It's so interesting and so important. Sandra, are there questions in the chat room?
No, there aren't any questions at this point, but let's just, if anyone has a question, please go ahead and let's see, if Talia, if you can pull your slides down, then we can see everyone and people can raise their hands. But
Talia, I have a question.
I can stop sharing so folks can, okay.
My question is, you said that there needs to be an amendment to the current law to change the status of it. I know the mill is in Utah. I'm not sure who the elected officials in Utah are. I mean, I know one of them by name. Is there any support in Congress or in the Biden's White House to amend this law in the way you're suggesting needs to be done?
Not at the moment. You know, Utah is primarily a GOP state. So it's tough, and they are an agreement state. So the NRC has something called an agreement state program where states can sign up to regulate radioactive waste within the state. And the NRC granted Utah that ability through the agreement state program. So Utah does have that that authority. As far as a federal amendment, that would have to be through UMTRA, the Uranium Milling Tailings Remediation Act, I believe is what it's called. And yeah, I could, right now it's really kind of too early in the game to really kind of lay out more detail there, but those are some of the ongoing strategic goals that we're working on.
Talia, in one of the links that you sent out, and we sent out to everyone, it was a video that showed the problems with the waste ponds. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that. Right, how secure are those waste ponds?
Yeah, so right now the facility has 2 waste ponds that are older that were built with a single liner, a single layer of plastic liner between 2 layers of crushed rock. So if those liners crack, then radioactive waste in the pits could leak out into shallow groundwater below. Today, those kinds of waste pits must have 2 liners with a leak detection system sandwiched in between them. And so right now, there is evidence of there's a shallow aquifer beneath the mill, and below that, even further, is the Navajo aquifer. And so right now, there is evidence of the shallow aquifer being contaminated. And it's only a matter of time before the Navajo aquifer is contaminated too. So in that water, the Navajo aquifer feeds the White Mesa Mill and other Navajo communities and non-tribal communities.
So is there any effort then to close the mill on the basis of, or at least put a temporary hold on things on the basis of those ponds?
Yeah, well, that's the work, right? Is like, this is the long-term goal, is to close down the mill and remediate it. That's what the White Mesa Mill wants. That's what the tribe wants. Mm-hmm. And so that is the long-term goal for everybody.
And how are you feeling then right now with the renewed interest in uranium mining under the pressures of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, uranium mining, it's not alternate feed, right? This is alternate feed that's going to the mill. So it's not necessarily uranium ore that's going there. And it is the last operating conventional uranium mill in the country, right? And when people talk about uranium mining for the most part happens in the Western states, right? There's 15 states where it has occurred, and where 2 of those big hotspots are in New Mexico and in Wyoming. The Colorado Plateau is very rich with uranium. On Navajo, we have a ban and a moratorium on uranium mining, and so does the Pueblo of Laguna. Wyoming State, I think, is more pro-uranium, but the Grants Mining District, like I mentioned earlier, is still very much would be subjugated to uranium mining. So there are some alarms there in regards to that.
I thought I heard that at Red Mountain by the Grand Canyon, there's a uranium mine that they want to make operational again. Is that correct?
Yeah, Red Butte, and that's the
Red Butte. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Pinyon Plain Mine. Yeah, and that is also owned by Energy Fuels.
And is there anything that citizens of the state of Arizona can do to stop that from happening, to make it more difficult from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can start lobbying and educating all decision makers on a local, state and federal level, right? And even amplifying tribal voices when it comes to those matters, because those are the frontline communities when it comes to impacted communities, right? Yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do still as far as educating folks on the nuclear fuel chain. When we talk about the nuclear fuel chain, people don't often talk about the front end, which is the mining, the milling, and the transportation, and the enrichment, right? And it's very carbon intensive because it requires fossil fuels for the heavy machinery, the trucks to transport it, and so it's very dirty. The whole fuel chain is dirty. And, you know, it just drives me nuts when people say that nuclear is green and clean, right? Because at the end, we always have that waste. And at the end, there's always going to be high level waste, right? And this is the reality. There is nowhere in the world to store high level waste. I mean, this is a problem across the globe that nobody's figured out. Nobody wants it in their backyard and nobody wants it in their front yard, right? And this is the problem. I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice zones across the globe, and most of them are on or near Indigenous communities.
Talia, do you mind speaking about this group of Japanese visitors that you just had in town and the way they're trying to coordinate with you on this work?
Yeah, so we did have some flyovers last week with some Japanese grassroots organizers who came in to actually, they did a tour of the facility, the White Mesa Mill, and they had some fancy energy fuels executives fly down from Denver in a private jet to give them that tour. And we were also in Blanding or in White Mesa giving flyover tours for tribal members, the media, and other folks who were interested. And so we actually ran into the energy fuels executive directors at the Blanding airport. And it was very awkward. They were like, "Who are you guys?" And we're like, "We're the Grand Canyon Trust." And they're like, "Oh, hey, we're energy fuels." And we're like, "Oh, wonderful. This is super awkward." Anywho, they had just gotten done giving our Japanese friends some a flyover or a tour of the facility. And they were getting ready to get back on their jet back to Denver. And then I'm sorry, I got so distracted here. We ran into them. They found out that we were giving flyover tours for media, and that alarmed them. So they recently put out a letter to the editor and to a few publications in response to our alternate feed report that I just shared, highlighting all these different waste streams that are going to the facility. And so they were alarmed. And so they did write those letters. And so there was a big response, and I'm actually working on drafting a response right now and publishing that here in the next couple of weeks, so in a week or so.
Oh, great. Oh, thank you so much. You know, hopefully you can stay on for Roberto, and hopefully Roberto's camera is working. Roberto, is your camera working? Is your microphone working?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. No, I tried everything with the camera. I think my camera isn't working on my laptop. So I apologize for that. But you guys can hear me though.
We can. Let me quickly introduce you, and we'll listen to you and imagine what your slides might look like. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Roberto Nutlouis. Roberto's Diné from the community of Pinon on the Navajo Nation. Roberto is one of the founders of the Black Mesa Water Coalition, an indigenous group formed over 20 years ago to resist coal extraction by Peabody Coal and to protect the water and the people of the Navajo Nation. For many years since, Roberto has been doing restorative economy and cultural work that includes youth leadership development and using traditional cultural knowledge to develop food sovereignty and to build gorgeous ceremonial hogans for communities across the Navajo Nation. Thank you, Roberto, very much for sharing your information with us and allowing us to learn from you.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction and the invite. Those are the identity that we have planned as Diné people, and it gives us a sense of place and a sense of community and how we're related to each other within our community and also within the larger tribe. I'm Bitterwater, born for Big Water. My maternal grandfathers are Jemez Pueblos. We call them the Maidishkiji. And my paternal grandfathers are the Sweet Water people. So that may explain why I do the work that I do, because most of my clan is water clan or water clans. So yeah, and then I apologize again. My camera isn't working, but I'll go ahead and forward the PowerPoint to Marcus and Sandra for you guys to review. But this would be really cool because most of our traditional narratives are all oral, so it allows you to use your imagination. That's how a lot of our stories were passed down. So you get to experience some of how Indigenous knowledge is shared orally and use your imagination in the process. So yeah, as mentioned in the introduction, I was one of the co-founders for the Black Mesa Water Coalition. I went to school in Flagstaff, NAU, and I did my undergrad there and also did part of my graduate program, which I need to finish. But yeah, so I've been in Flagstaff for a number of years, and it's been a very beautiful and powerful space to be there and to have been blessed to come across other like-minded Indigenous students and community members there in Flagstaff to really help politicize me and engage in what was happening in our community. Again, Peabody Coal Company was the beast that we've been battling for a number of years. And we weren't the ones that launched these campaign. Our elders, especially from Big Mountain, and all the elders from the what we call the Hopi Partition Land, they were the ones that started this resistance back in the 70s when the coal companies were making their way into our communities. And so we felt a need to help continue to uplift those struggles when we were college students. And it gave us a chance to, at least for me personally, to begin to really look deeper into what are these issues in our communities and how can we address and uplift struggles of our communities. And of course, at that time, NAU had launched their Applied Indigenous Studies program. So that was very, very helpful for me to understand the deeper federal Indian policies and just the whole colonial history and how lands were stolen, resources exploited and continue to be exploited, and why we are in the predicament that we find ourselves in as Indigenous people here in the US. We're basically at the bottom of the social ladder in America. We were not supposed to be here, but by God's grace, by the universe's grace, we were able to survive the genocide, and we're still here. But these policies that were created that deemed us subhuman species in the early academic years, the development of academia, those still, those racist science really made its way into federal Indian policies, and they still govern us and subjugate us to what Congress wants. And of course, Congress has the ears of corporations that are always wanting to take from our community. And it's the continued colonization that we experience as Indigenous people and as Diné people. And that insight was very important for me to realize that this is going to be a long-term struggle, a long-term resistance. And part of that resistance is also to look into what, as Diné people, as Indigenous people, where does our power lie? Because too often we're told that we are, again, federal laws in America contact, and then everything just goes crazy. And we're kind of conditioned to think that that's all our history is, but we have deeper histories as Indigenous people. And so for me, that was really important. If we're gonna root ourselves in power, what power do we root ourselves in. And for me, it's been, and I think as a collective with Black Mesa Water Coalition and others and other folks that we've come across through our journey, we've all recognized that it's our traditional knowledge and the ancestral wisdom that will allow us to identify solutions to our issues, and that will allow us to understand what is needed to really move forward in a way that can restore a lot of the broken relationships that have happened. And part of that broken relationship is to our environment. So that's the work that we've done, really doing a lot of community engagement over the years. For Black Mesa Water Coalition, it was a student group, but eventually most of us graduated. And so we kind of incorporated to continue the work. And I served as a board member, and we had staff that continued various campaigns over the years at the Navajo Nation level. In that, while I was on the board, I also worked with another nonprofit organization. So most of my career has been in the nonprofit sector. The organization was called Indigenous Community Enterprises, and it was really a creative way to look at the overgrowth in the national forests in Arizona, and engaging the communities that live near these forests, like the Coconino National Forest, and understanding how did the Indigenous people utilize the forests and manage the forests. And in that conversation, an idea came about to build traditional hogans utilizing the small diameter log, which is what is so needed to clean up the forest. There's just too many small diameter logs, trees, and undergrowth that is fueling a lot of the forest fires that are happening. But yet there's no large scale industry to process these logs, the small diameter logs. So that's how the organization was formed, Indigenous Community Enterprises. I didn't participate in the formulation of that organization, but I was hired on later down the road, and we were able to really showcase what partnership would look like, and creative ways of addressing housing needs, and also looking at ways to help clean up the forests. And in that work, we built over, at least when I was there, we built over 54 homes across the reservation. We also explored with straw bale, energy efficient homes. Yeah, and then again, a lot of education, community education with that. And then BMWC had a staff turnover, so I was asked to come back on as a staff. So in 2012, I got back onto Black Mesa Water Coalition. And at that point, there was a lot of excitement because previously Obama administration was in office, and this whole green job initiatives was huge during his administration. And a lot of our previous staff on Black Mesa Water Coalition really tried to run with that and create campaigns on the Navajo Nation. It was a really great campaign, a lot of partnership. We did some partnership with Grand Canyon Trust in that effort as well. Unfortunately, our tribe was not ready to go in that direction, as I think most politicians, or a lot of the governments are. There's no political will. And we understood that. I guess we realized that, and what internally we decided to, rather than trying to change laws, let's go back to the community. And what does sustainability look like? What does green job look like? So we wrestled with that term, green job and sustainability. And what in that conversation with the community and internally, we recognized that a green job isn't really the appropriate word to capture the work we needed to do. And sustainability itself, that term wasn't enough as well. Like, what are we sustaining? What are we trying to keep as a status quo? And for us, really looking deeper into the traditional wisdom and knowledge of our people, we recognize that regenerative and restorative is a way to go. And part of it, of course, is rekindling our relationship to our homelands, reconnecting to these prayerful ways how we approach our environment. And from that, the narratives that our people have of our homeland, utilizing that as an insight in how we're gonna organize in our community. So we really looked, I personally looked into the traditional knowledge and some of the different methodologies that we have, and how we engage our community and how we utilize their response in creating programs. So restorative economy program was something that we developed, and we ran that program all the way till the pandemic hit. And in that work was really to look at the traditional lifeways that are still being practiced here especially here on the Black Mesa region. Black Mesa region is kind of like the heart of the Navajo Nation. So it's a really isolated rural communities, but the culture and the language is fairly strong in comparison to other communities that are near the border, reservation borders. So we recognize that strength, and we really worked hard to uplift the traditional lifeways, and also at simultaneously engaging with tribal leaders and local elected officials in bringing this traditional lifeways to the forefront of community development strategies. And it was something new for a lot of our community members, because we're always conditioned to think that corporate America is community development. And unless you see McDonald's and Burger King everywhere, you're not progressing. So there's a lot of that unlearning of what is development and what is community development and what is economy. And also in that work, you know, we Black Mesa Water Coalition had a lot of allies nationally. And so we were part of the Climate Justice Alliance. And in that larger alliance, National Alliance, we wanted to reframe some of this narrative, the movement narrative around climate justice, environmental justice, but also looking at just transition. We know a transition and a change is inevitable because climate change is happening, but it's not guaranteed that it's going to be just. It's not guaranteed that we as Indigenous people, people of color, will have the adequate resources to adjust to the impacts of climate change. And so just transition was really uplifting that, and also looking at what our communities are already doing in addressing this, because communities are already adjusting to it. Farmers, especially in our communities, farmers and ranchers, folks that interact with the landscape on a day-to-day basis, they've been adjusting and they've been recognizing. So we felt a need to uplift that, you know, the strategies that they're developing and how they're dealing with the impacts of climate change, and utilizing that as an example of what just transition looks like in terms of giving the community, empowering communities to come up with their own solution. And that was part of our work, was to do the community engagements, getting the feedback and utilizing our traditional knowledge, and then working with some of our Diné scholars who had developed these methodologies, and helping us to really root it in our work, the traditional knowledge. So that was a very powerful work that we did. We did a lot of ceremonies in the process, but unfortunately, the COVID hit, the pandemic hit, and the organization just wasn't able to survive that. So at the moment, I guess at this point, we've launched another organization called Nihikeya, which is our homeland. But when you really look at the root of those words, Nihikeya, it means our collective footprint. So when we talk about homeland, we call Keya, and what that means is your footprint that you leave, your ecological footprint that you leave around a place you call home. And in our tradition, our ecological footprint should be one that is regenerative, because other life is coming after us, and we cannot destroy the life forces and the life sources within our ecosystem. So that is a big part of our ancestral wisdom that we really uplift, that this is a really important responsibility that we've overlooked, and that it's important to relook at these values and how do we translate that into action. So that's been the work that we've done. And part of that work, as it was mentioned, hogan building became important because that's where traditionally these narrative, these ceremonies are shared with the community. And we found out in organizing that a lot of the current spaces like schools and chapter houses is just a space for a lot of our communities don't feel comfortable in those spaces. Again, we had a horrible history of the boarding school, and a lot of our elders have been a part of that tragic history of our people. And so people don't like to go to the school, a lot of our elders, that we need to be engaging in these conversations. Many of them don't like to go to the chapter houses because that's where the governments, whether it's the tribal government or the federal government, will be coming in, telling these are the new laws, these are the new rules. You got to stop grazing, you got to stop, just really always about stopping our traditional life ways. So these are spaces that our people were hesitant to go. So we had to create a safe space. And I think that's where the hogan really came into play. And even the schools began to take interest because we've been told that the language is where we're losing the language. The young people are not really learning the language anymore. And schools are looking for creative ways to get the kids to learn the language and the culture. So these ceremonial hogans is also a teaching space, a cultural teaching space at the school. So we've been able to do that work within the last 2 years during the pandemic. I think that really helped carry us through. Right now, the other part of the work we've done and that we're continuing to do is watershed restoration. You all are probably aware about the ongoing water shortage, the airification that's happening in the Southwest. And we have to really hold on to the water that we do get, the precipitation, and figure out ways to store that back into the ground and recharge the aquifers. And so watershed restoration became very key in our work, and that's tied to our food systems too. We recognize that a lot of our farms, traditional farms up here that we were restoring, were fed by these waterways. We call them alluvial farming. So a lot of our people, not only just the Diné people, but also other tribes like the Hopis, have strategically placed their food systems within these alluvial fans within the watershed. Alluvial fan is in the valley and kind of creates this fan where it spreads out all the sediments and the moisture that it brings. So that's the place that you will have a lot of organic, the soil will be very rich in organic materials and natural fertilized, and also a lot of moisture. So a lot of these farmlands have eroded away because people are no longer interacting with these food systems and with their watershed. So that's the other work that we did and we continue to do in partnership with other organizations. So, and again, for us, this was really looking at what does just transition look like and how do we take that responsibility on ourselves and begin to seek solutions. And that solution, of course, rooted in our ancestral wisdom and the knowledge of our place. So that's where we're at. That's where I'm at with my work. As I mentioned, we launched a new organization called Nihikeya, which really speaks to the importance of leaving restorative ecological footprint and beginning to not just beginning, but continuously reminding our people that this is part of our important spiritual responsibility. And we have to find creative ways to fulfill this responsibility. So that's the work that we're doing. We've been successful in partnering with the tribe in a lot of these land conservation efforts through the CARES Act and the current funding, the ARPA. The tribe has committed to investing some more resources into these water catchment systems that we're creating and creating food systems that are traditional food systems. So yeah,
Roberto,
so there's a lot of work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is so rich what you're doing and so important. I have two questions, and my guess is other people have questions. But
Mark, before you go forward with your question, Marie has put in the chat that some people might not know what a hogan is. And so, Roberto, do you just want to clarify what a hogan is?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Yes, we call it hogan, but in English, it's called a hogan. But traditionally, we call it hogan, and hogan is a circular and typically an octagon shape home, and you'll see that all over the Navajo Nation. Today, most people use the lumber that they get from the lumber store. But we do the traditional log hogans with this twirling log roof. Very few of these type of are built, and so we through the Black Mesa Water Coalition programs, we they wanted to learn how to build this and it looks so beautiful. And that's why I think a lot of people wanted us to build for them, and there's still a lot of people in line wanting us to build. But it is a traditional home. They look like a yurt, but it's made out of log and natural earth, the traditional hogans.
Oh, great. You know, so here's my, it's really two questions, but one is what are the biggest obstacles that you face? And the second part of that is maybe even more important, is what can the non-traditional, non-native communities do to support your work?
I feel, but the greatest challenge is, I feel like, is our own community. We've been abused in so many ways. And, you know, and part of that abuse is a lot of our people were, when they were going through the school system, boarding school system, they were told, they basically demonized our traditional knowledge and really, so a lot of our community members still hold on to that. So when we talk about community development and talk about traditional knowledge, you know, it's a challenge. And so I feel like that's the biggest challenge is working with your own community. And yeah. So what was your second question?
Well, what can the non-native community do to be supportive of the work that you're doing?
Wow. Well, I feel like this is I guess at the moment, I feel like this community engagement piece is something that we have to do on our own as a community, wrestle with these questions and wrestle with a lot of other things, and really come to some sense of how are we going to move forward collectively. I feel like that work is really important that we do ourselves. But as far as support goes, I think learning is so key. Like learn where you're from, where you're at, and get connected to your place. I know like a lot of people will probably stone me for saying this as an Indigenous person. I feel like, you know, America is still new to this land. And what drives it is the exploitation of what is called resources. I think is wrongly labeled. Those are life forces. And in that plundering is leaving a devastated landscape, which is very unfortunate. But that has to end. And part of ending that is we have to create a different mindset and reestablish a relationship to our homelands and really identify it as a homeland and not just an economic opportunity to move to another town or city and make your money and move on. So I think, and that's a long-term work and that's a long-term conscious shift that needs to occur, but it has to happen. And I feel like that's the greatest support non-natives can do, is how do you become connected to your homeland, where you call home, and what is your responsibility to your home, and how are you going to manage that homeland, is very, very, very important. Yeah.
All right. I completely agree with you on that, that, you know, we look at these as economic problems and as technical problems and political problems. And they're largely cultural problems and problems with our values and the problems with how we understand ourselves in relationship to the world. And no, that's very helpful.
Thank you.
Sandra, we're at 8:10.
I just want to say that I just put into the link, into the chat, a link to an image of one of the hogans that Roberto has built. And you'll see what a marvelous structure it is. And as soon as Roberto, when you send me your PowerPoint, we'll send it out to everyone too, so you can marvel at some of these, at the work that Roberto's been doing.
Okay.
Well, we are at 8:08. I'm nearly out of time here, but I know that Marie Gladue is on, and Marie's also been involved in this work. And Marie, I wonder if you can if you don't mind putting your camera on and saying a few words about this project as well. I mean, probably unfair of me to put you on the spot, but I know you've been very deeply involved in this too. And it looks like Marie's taking a break from this. So
I just want to say a little, since you brought Marie, Marie's been such an inspiration through BMWC. She was one of my partner in community engagement, and she knows so much, a lot about the traditional laws, the natural laws, and she's developing what we call the Hogan dialogue, which is really, really important, the way she's developing it. And we've utilized some of her models in our community engagement, and is very, very effective in a sense that, you know, a lot of these meetings that take place in chapters, this is our local government governing spaces, it doesn't really acknowledge the kinship, the relationship, and how to speak and consensus building. So Marie has developed this model, what she calls the Hogan dialogue. And what I found really unique about that is that a lot of people that come to our meeting, they leave very happy and optimistic. Versus if they were to go to a chapter meeting, everybody's so pissed and they walk away with that energy. And that's not a good energy to have. And Marie talks a lot about also mindfulness, breathing, how to catch yourself when you get triggered. So a lot of this is also really addressing the healing aspect, because I think having been on the offense since day one of colonization, we're so, I think our brain is conditioned to be in this mode of just, what's the word, ready to defend. And you can't always exist from that way of thinking. It could become toxic. So when Marie goes out and helps to do, she's very conscious about that, and really tries to bring some of these healing techniques into that facilitation spaces. And I really appreciated her for bringing that to the work.
well, that's quite a wonderful honor to Marie, and I hope she'll hear that. And we've recorded this, so we'll make sure she hears those words from you, Roberto. I think we're so fortunate in this community to have people like Roberto and Talia, who are doing this really important work of not just of a form of activism that brings together traditional knowledge, creativity, and healing. And I think, again, I thank you both for being here this evening and for offering us the example of your work and your good energy here. I think we're ready to close this evening. We have In 2 weeks, we have our final Zoom presentation. And that is with, yes, Paul Engler, who is the founder of the Center for the Working Poor in Los Angeles. And he's also the author, the co-author of the book, This is an Uprising. And he's going to speak in 2 weeks to us on movement ecology. I wish he had been here tonight to hear the work of Talia and Roberto, but we can bring all of that forward in the next 2 weeks when we talk with him. Thank you all for being with us tonight and for participating in the Reading Action Project and for all the good work that you are doing. We'll see you in a couple weeks.